In the game of KeyForge, there are a variety of counters that are used during play. The most common of these are things like power and armor, along with status effects like stun and ward. But there are a few special cards in KeyForge that use their own unique counter found nowhere else in the game, and that's what this video is going to cover, every unique counter in the game of KeyForge. As of the release of Dark Tidings, 8 out of the 10 houses have a card or two with a unique counter, and there are currently 12 cards total with one of these counters, thus resulting in 12 of these counters total. House Logos and House Mars are the only 2 houses without a unique counter. Let's start with Brobnar and its artifact, the Big One. The Big One reads, after a creature is played, put a fuse counter on the Big One. If there are 10 or more fuse counters on the Big One, destroy each creature and artifact. This is usually an exciting artifact to have in play, knowing that each step you take towards a larger and larger board of creatures, sooner or later the whole thing will just be blown away, with literally everything getting destroyed, including artifacts and the Big One itself. Moving on to House Dis is another artifact called Wretched Gaul, which reads, action, if there is a Doom counter in play, destroy each creature with a Doom counter. Otherwise, put a Doom counter on a creature. In the end, this artifact really just provides a rather convoluted way to destroy a single creature. However, it does threaten the opponent a little, especially once a Doom counter is in play, because they know that sooner or later that creature of theirs, probably a somewhat valuable one, will be gone, with very little they can do about it save rewarding. House Sanctum has a unique counter of its own, and it comes on an artifact called Book of Malfaction, which reads, after your Ember is stolen, put a Warrant counter on Book of Malfaction for each Ember stolen. Omni, remove a Warrant counter from Book of Malfaction. If you do, purge a creature. Against Shadows, or any deck that steals at all, this artifact is fantastic to have, and poses a real threat to the opponent. They are forced to ask themselves whether it's worth it to steal and risk having one of their high-value creatures permanently removed from the game. And unfortunately, despite the fact that multiple Warrant counters can be put in play in a single turn, you can only use one Warrant counter per turn, resulting in only one purge. The next unique counter card happens to be a creature this time, a Dark Tidings creature from House Saurian called Eclectic Ambrosius. It reads, at the end of your turn, put a knowledge counter on Eclectic Ambrosius. Action, remove 3 knowledge counters from Eclectic Ambrosius. If you do, gain 6 Ember. At first read, this card seems totally broken, but once you analyze it further, it becomes clear that this card isn't quite as strong as it looks. For one thing, this creature has to stick around for 4 whole turns before it heralds any value at all. The first 3 turns it's just sitting there, collecting knowledge counters, good for only Reaper 2. For another thing, it is a creature with only 4 power, it's not even elusive or hazardous or anything. You can potentially taunt and or ward it, but those only last so long before they're eventually broken through. And chances are the opposing player will be dedicating nearly all their resources to breaking through to your Eclectic Ambrosius to destroy it, seeing as it is an entire key just waiting to happen. Eclectic Ambrosius actually has an evil twin with its own unique counter. It reads, Reap, put an Ignorance counter on the enemy creature. As long as that creature has an Ignorance counter, its text box is considered blank except for traits. This card has potential to be incredibly vicious. Putting an Ignorance counter on a high-value enemy creature could be devastating for the opponent. It's also a great way to nullify the abilities of a strong creature if you don't really have any ways to destroy that creature. Rather than getting rid of it, you're instead just rendering it useless. That thing could be taunted, warded, the works, but it still can't be used to its full effect. House Saurian happens to have a third card with a unique counter, that of the key cheat, the Colosseum. It reads, after an enemy creature is destroyed while fighting, put a glory counter on the Colosseum. Omni. If there are 6 or more glory counters on the Colosseum, remove 6 and forge a key at current cost. This card is interesting in that it requires a good balance of fighting and reaping to make it work, and as a key cheat it can tend to be a little more convoluted since it does require a unique counter. But in the end, it is a key waiting to be had, and if you have a deck more tailored to fighting, it really shouldn't be all that difficult to pull off. Next is a creature from House Shadows, Mastermindy. He's a 2-power elusive creature that reads, at the end of your turn, put a Scheme counter on Mastermindy. Action, remove each Scheme counter from Mastermindy. Steal 1 Ember for each Scheme counter removed this way. I'd argue that Mastermindy is actually superior to Eclectic Ambrosius, for a number of reasons. Mastermindy provides some steal value the next turn he's played, whereas Eclectic Ambrosius, as I detailed before, takes a lot of time before his central mechanic does anything useful. Mastermindy, as long as he stays alive, can be used to steal turn after turn after turn, or you can build up his power turn after turn as well, and if he survives, he can steal 3 or 4 Ember with a simple action. The next house, Star Alliance, has 2 cards with unique counters. The first of these cards is an artifact called KeyForge, which reads, play, put 2 time counters on KeyForge. Players cannot forge keys. At the start of your turn, remove a time counter from KeyForge, then destroy it if there are no time counters on KeyForge. Now I personally don't have any experience with this card, but from what I can tell, it looks as though this card is a card that needs to be played with some pretty precise timing. Otherwise, I feel like a lot of the time you'll just be playing this card for the Ember, and the time counters won't do all that much for you. Star Alliance's other unique counter card is Disruption Field, an upgrade that reads, your opponent's keys cost +1 Ember for each disruption counter on Disruption Field. This creature gains, fight, reap, put a disruption counter on Disruption Field. Depending on the creature you put this on, and what sort of protection that creature has on and around it, this unique counter card can actually be some pretty good key control. What's really nice about it is that it's simply a rule that applies to your opponent that can be made better and better the more you use that creature and stack up the disruption counters. This is a card I'm never sad to see in a deck. Moving on to House Unfathomable, which also has 2 unique counter cards, we have Effigy of Melaruk. This meme of a card reads, after an enemy creature reaps, put an awakening counter on Effigy of Melaruk. If there are 6 or more awakening counters on Effigy of Melaruk, move it to a flank of your battle line as a creature with 100 power and 100 armor. Its text box is considered blank. In all the times I've played with a deck that has this card in it, it's only ever come out once, and it was really exactly what it said it was, a 100 power, 100 armor creature. Yeah, those are shocking values for a creature to have, but it's still just a really vanilla creature that requires a unique counter to put into play. The next Unfathomable card is one of the weirder ones for me. It's called Killigog's Trench, and it reads, at the end of your turn, put 1 depth counter on Killigog's Trench, then destroy each creature with power equal to the number of depth counters on Killigog's Trench. I've played a few games with this card in play, and those games were just kinda strange. Eventually, once a higher number of depth counters are on Killigog's Trench, it stops doing anything because there are so few creatures with such high power. I honestly don't know how to play around this card or what the right time to play this card is. Whether I'm the one who plays it or not, it just seems to randomly destroy some creatures throughout a few turns, and that's the end of it. I suppose it does offer at least a little board control if you don't have a very creature-heavy deck, but Killigog's Trench is certainly a strange one. The last card with a unique counter comes from House Untamed, Vineapple Tree. Vineapple Tree reads, keys cost +1 for each growth counter on Vineapple Tree. After a key is forged, remove each growth counter from Vineapple Tree. Action, put a growth counter on Vineapple Tree. This is widely regarded as one of the weirdest Untamed cards around, and somehow it managed to stick around for 2 whole sets, Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation. At the end of the day, key control is key control, and although Vineapple Tree affects you just as much as it does the opponent, and you have to call Untamed to use it, this can be a card that keeps your opponent from forging long enough for you to pull into the lead or win the game. However, its effectiveness does reset as soon as a key is forged, so once again, kinda finicky and not often a card that people are just overwhelmed with joy to find in their deck. So, those are all the unique counters in the game of KeyForge. From the destructive doom counters of the Wretched Doll to the valuable glory counters of the Colosseum, these cards, whether they're super competitive or not, are always pretty fun to find in the deck. The fact that they use a unique counter system is pretty neat, and they provide some mechanics that you rarely get to see in a KeyForge game. Personally, I can't wait to see what sort of counters are added to the game in later sets and what sort of game states they create. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what your thoughts are regarding these unique counters down in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to Aembermedes for more KeyForge content. See you guys later.